Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast hosted by me, Dr. Stefan Walzer. I am the innovator of Market Access 4.0 and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics since 2004. Discover Market Access 4.0 and unveil the future with our innovative solutions. Max Insights, our fast and easy AI-based reimbursement planning platform. Dobo, our new revolutionizing way of creating reimbursement dossiers across the globe with the first and only dossier writing AI bot. Cubo, our new AI-based objection handling platform. And Waffle, train with Waffle's virtual reality genius in an immersive environment and with an AI-based counterpart. We are Market Access 4.0. So check out our website, marketaccess4-0.com. And now let's dive into the current discussions, processes, and trends in market access across the globe. So welcome back to another show of the Market Access podcast. Today we're quite, I would say, broadly speaking, on market access. I have the author and a well-known, long-lasting market access expert, Kasem Akhras from the US in there. And he wrote, besides probably other papers as well, the book Frontiers in Market Access, a practical approach to mastering market access in emerging markets, which is obviously a very important consideration as well, as we're not only, let's say, speaking about, or should not only speak about the US and EU5, but probably as well more broadly. Kasem, before we get into the topic, maybe you want as well to introduce yourself briefly.
Thanks, Stefan, for the invitation. Looking forward to this webcast. My name is Kasem Akhras. I've been in the pharmaceutical field for 29 years, longer than I care to remember. I've been in the field working as a global pricing, market access, health economic and outcomes research field, both looking at a global as well as regional in the US and in international markets. I spent the first 17 years of my life, a professional career, generating evidence, working in clinical development, doing burden of illness studies, publishing cost effectiveness to support the value of products that we bring in the pharmaceutical industry. And the last 10 or 12 years, I've been focusing on market access and commercial aspects, and using the evidence that we generate to really try to influence access, market access, and patient access to the novel therapy that we bring to the market. As you mentioned, I published Frontiers in Market Access book, which is one of only 3 or 4 books in the area. But I also last year I published a chapter in a very good book, which is Development of Gene Therapies. I wrote chapter 16 along with one of my colleagues. And then also now I'm working on another book that hopefully will be published, that's by Forbes Books, soon, on about voices in oncology. So I'm passionate about this field, and I hope to share some of my experiences in market access, as you said, from a US, but also from a global perspective as well. And hopefully we'll get into some of the interesting areas that we're all facing in market access now, because we know that market access is a must and a critical role for the access to innovative therapy that we bring into the market.
Absolutely. And I think it highlights already quite nicely, I think, your background, your experience, and the various, let's say, areas you have been as well working on, and also obviously the kind of various books and book chapters you have just alluded to. So maybe starting a bit, let's say, from an early, more conceptual basis, right? I mean, you have as well just said, as I did as well, market access is obviously, let's say, as well, a kind of evolving landscape, an evolving role and area as well. And I would also say particularly probably in emerging markets. So if you, for example, maybe even compare a bit the requirements and the challenges, especially the key challenges, let's say, for pharmaceutical and especially pharmaceutical companies, which they are facing basically today in ensuring access to innovative medicines between maybe the bigger countries, the more evolved countries, maybe systems as well, versus some of those emerging markets? What are the key challenges in comparison?
It's a good question. Actually, whether you're talking about developed market or developing markets, what we're facing now is a huge demand for innovative therapies. And that's driven mainly by the increase in social media awareness, the openness, and the greater role that the patient voice plays in their management. So that basically put a huge pressure on systems for the demand of innovative therapies. That increased demand and basically coupled with decreased healthcare budgets in many of the markets. So that challenge, decreased budget, is one of the key challenges that healthcare system face, and then also the pharmaceutical companies or innovative therapy producers, because obviously the increased demand and the reduced budget is leading to a more restrictive environment, again, in both developed and developing countries. And the restrictive reimbursement is actually putting a challenge for pharma companies. And how do we ensure that the product that we develop and bring to the market will end up being used by patients who or are eligible for them? So these challenges is creating also new dynamics. So the restrictive environment that payers are putting is leading to new dynamics. And one of the dynamics that's actually changing, which is interesting, both in the US or in the developed market and in the emerging markets, is cost shifting. So claim denials or higher copays is forcing patients to put more out of pocket if they want to access innovative therapies. And these challenges, as I said, are globally in both developed and developing markets. And so pharma is actually now have to come up with different ways to try to address these challenges to ensure that the innovative therapies end up being commercially successful and used for patients who need them.
No, I fully agree. I think that's a very good point. I think your introduction into the key challenge, I thought was really good, and I totally agree with it. The high demand through social media, you could maybe even label it as kind of democratization of innovation, right? In a way, because I mean, people have much faster, at least access to information for innovation. But this is always as well driving, let's say, healthcare companies, but also even more, I would say, the systems and the payers into a quite difficult situation, especially nowadays with even, let's say, more scrutinized kind of budgets, where maybe we're getting more to the point, is pricing then the key issue overall, and the price setting? I mean, especially maybe comparing the various countries.
Exactly. So pricing, as always, is a key challenge that no matter which jurisdiction you're operating, the price will always be a contentious point, right?
Exactly.
But that's because price, as we always say, price is a reflection of value, and value means different things to different people. So some innovations are valued more depending on the public health sector. So, for example, if you take a look at countries like Egypt, if they had high prevalence of hepatitis C, so to them, an innovative therapy that addresses hepatitis C would be valued far more than a therapy that actually has low prevalence in their population. Mm-hmm. So now the price becomes a key challenge of how do I address the access and the high prevalence with limited healthcare budget. So pricing, we also know that pricing is actually there's a global system that regulates pricing. So every country has own pricing rules. And one of the key things that pharma has to be very, very good at now, especially with expensive therapies, is how do you ensure that the pricing strategy that you put early on will address or take into consideration the different access and pricing mechanisms that international reference pricing or value-based pricing's country basically operationalize.
Yeah, exactly. Which brings us to the next point, right? And of course, I think a very important thing, what you as well just mentioned, is the global, let's say, system, or maybe in other words, I think every country and maybe every even regional and local system has their own pricing regulations and rules, which is obviously as well giving a bit of a difficulty, let's say, in order to as well more price differentiate, as we know that as economists, right, between different demands and different payers. Having said that, I think you already bridged that a bit, where different pricing strategies could as well be applied. So meaning there could as well be different, for example, managed entry agreements, right? So what are the most effective ones, would you see? Maybe especially maybe more in the emerging markets, where, of course, we know from, let's say, the bigger ones, I would also guess, but also interesting, curious to hear your thoughts. I think there were a couple of risk share agreements, especially in the UK, roughly 20 years ago, the first attempts. But then I think it was more taken a bit away, too complex, too demanding from a systems perspective. So what are your kind of, let's say, takes at the moment where those kind of pricing implementations might be going?
So as you well know, there is no one size fits all. In market access, rule number one is know your customer and customize your solution to the payer. So for example, we know that in developed markets, there's a lot of focusing on HTA and reimbursement and negotiation, right? And there is a well operationalized system that payers operate within and pharma companies have to operate within, right? That HTA approach and the value-based approach is actually now being piloted or implemented in some of the international markets. Ironically, when I was in the international region based in Dubai, I had responsibility for Middle East and Africa. And I had the fortunate situation where Pharma, the trade association, had an office, and we were trying to work with the government officials, ministries of health, on how do you, as they started looking at the value, then the price, how do you basically drive implementation of value-based and healthcare, a value-based approach into healthcare systems. And we've done quite a bit of work with the London School of Economics, and we published a seminal paper in August of 2020 on how do you move from price, from cost to value. But going back to your question, you have to customize the solution based on what the market demands. So, for example, in low and middle income countries, we know that they are vast systems, all the way from public payer, private payer, and out of pocket. So the solution that you bring for each segment, now some of the countries is actually may have all three systems in one. So you've got a portion of the healthcare system that's paid for by a government sector, public funds. You have a sizable private sector that is funded by employers, and you have a sizable segment that's out of pocket. Now, the solution, the market access solution that you bring into each one of these will vary. So you may bring in an outcomes-based agreement for a public payer and a private payer. For an out-of-pocket patient, you're going to have to address affordability. So you may employ things like cost-sharing agreement as opposed to an outcomes-based agreement with a patient who has affordability issues by bringing the patient, the company, and an NGO, for example, in order to ensure that access is there for patients. The solution that you bring in also will vary by the obviously the welfare of the system and the ability of patient to pay. So we all know that the access pyramid has everything from the tip to the base, and some of that, let's face it, some of the innovative medicine that come in and you go into some of the the low and mid income countries, we may not be able to reach the base of the pyramid from an access perspective to address all needs. But this is where sort of you really need to be creative on the types of solution that you can bring in, and be realistic on how much. And that's interesting, actually, point. So this is where now market access cannot be an afterthought for therapy. It has to be well thought out from the beginning. When you develop, and there are very good there are companies who have very good at this in terms of bringing the access piece to sit on that development table early on, so that the evidence generation is discussed, where the decisions are made on what to do to ensure that the evidence is going to be available at launch to address. And key component of this is align cross-functionally, particularly with the commercial team and senior management, on which market we're going to enter. What are we going to play? Because for certain therapies, gene therapy as an example, because of the high price tag, you may not be able to go to all markets. So there has to be alignment on how do we don't want to leave patients behind, but we also want to operate within the system that regulates healthcare and pricing together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's all very important kind of aspects. And of course, let's see, it has two components in here, right? What you were just speaking about. I think one is the system itself. So knowing obviously who is the customer, and also obviously trying to, let's say, divide the customer even in subtypes, right? As you said, public, private, out of pocket. But the other thing, and that's the other component, is basically as well the internal kind of negotiation within a health or maybe a kind of pharmaceutical company, where you also brought in obviously as well cross-functional decision making, because ultimately not only market access persons can and should decide probably on access versus pricing, but it has a bigger kind of decision making. And I think in your book, I think you could at least read that as well throughout of it, basically, that you would as well need to think a bit about different kind of, let's say, mindsets on there, right? So, I mean, if you could combine a bit also out of your experience, how would you, or what would you maybe rather recommend to market access managers if they're acting in such a volatile and heterogeneous kind of environment as market access basically is, with respect to balancing the patient access versus the optimal price for a company? So just sticking now within that company, let's say, insight.
Very good. So look, so the mindset, and as you indicated, I have a whole chapter in my book on mindset, because I'm a firm believer in the importance of mindset and ability, and how you will operate and how you'll be successful. So let's talk about some of the personal from the individual market access team, and then from the organizational. So one of the principles that I used to tell my team all the time when I'm operating in international region in particular, because we have a lot of challenges, is where there is a will, there is a way. So I say this because what I've seen in we are successful in markets is where there is a commitment, personal commitment on the market access team to drive. It's no different, actually, Stefan, than when somebody has a project and he driving the project and successful. A person may come in and say, well, that's going to fail. But if someone has a clear vision of, no, I know what it takes to be successful, we're going to drive it, I'm going to enlist the company and the teams behind me, and then they make it happen. Same thing with market access. A person who has a commitment to ensure that a life-saving therapy will get to patient, they will know how to operate within the system. And I used to tell my team that for you to be successful, you have to understand how your healthcare system, how segment operates, as good as your customers. Then that allows you to bring in the right solutions for them. Know what their pain points are. Know what incentives they have to operate within. Then that allows, on the personal side, that allows the market access leaders and the teams under them to really design the right programs for the end user, the patient, the payer to accept. So that's very critical. Know the healthcare system, know the incentives, know what problems you need to solve for you. If a particular approach, for example, because outcomes-based agreement was a sexy thing, if everyone wants to bring outcomes-based and just to cut and paste, it's not going to work. So if outcomes-based agreement is not the right approach, don't throw it to your customers. See what's interesting for them, what their interests are, and come up with a solution. That actually will make the partnership better and allows you to really be successful in your approach. On the organizational side, from the mindset, what is critical is two things. One, senior management to have buy-in that market access is everyone's responsibility. What this does, it allows functional leadership to cooperate. In fact, I used to always say that, look, we in market access as a function, we lead market access, but market access is everyone's responsibility. Although from the translational medicine team, when we're working with the preclinical and phase 1, phase 2, to the medical affairs, to the regulatory, to the commercial teams, we need to all be responsible for market access to ensure that we can deliver what it takes to be successful. So functional alignment, the operating mindset that we're gonna make this happen. And from an organizational perspective, obviously, I would be remiss if I didn't say that what's also important is the right investment, and that's both from an FDA perspective, but it's also from a funding. Because as you will know, some of the innovative therapies that we're developing now, the market is not well developed, which means we're going to have significant investment to understand the markets, understand the systems, and then be able to really craft a market development plan that allow us to bring innovative therapy successfully. Because the last thing we want to do is, if we don't understand the area, to say, hurry up and wait. We go in and we develop a product and we sit there for 2 years or 3 years not getting reimbursement, which is not to everyone's benefit.
No, fully agree. I mean, I like, especially, let's say, when you brought up market access is everyone's responsibility. I think this is, I mean, it sounds so odd in a way, but I have as well seen it when I was in pharma, that, let's say, it is not the obvious thing. And I think at the end of the day, the most senior leadership would need to live that. Otherwise, it's getting difficult. I think when I have been at the headquarters here in a big pharma company, I've never had that kind of issue. I think senior management was always on top and basically was always communicating that same kind of direction. But I have seen it as well with an important affiliate. It was not Germany. It was another important affiliate where the GM was standing up in a town hall meeting and was basically pointing to an affiliate colleague of mine at that time, which is saying, and this guy will make the product available in our country, which is wrong. Because it's not that guy. He might, as you said, he's leading it and he might be a key person. But ultimately, it's not only him, it's a whole team around it, because you need regulatory, you need medical, you need science, you need marketing, you need whoever, right? I mean, everybody needs to bring their little piece. And that little thing could also vary depending on in which country you're acting.
Absolutely, it really is. It's and that's the mindset, right? That's the mindset. Particularly if you have a crown jewel, everybody understands that, because it says whatever you do, all the efforts has to go there, right? But that's what it takes to be successful. If you operationalize that in market access early on, then you'll be successful, and the uptake of your product to the right patient and the right will be there. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So it's not just one responsibility. Everyone really has to be marching to the same orders. Which means that the market access leadership function, the value and access team, whatever, because it has, every company has it's a different name for this. But the idea is that you align and say, look, this is the strategy. You communicate the strategy and you show the plan. This is why I refer to the market development plan. And we've done this well for the last 10 years, humbly speaking, where you say, here's market development plan. And you lay it out And that plan is understood by commercial, medical affairs, and regulatory. And we all go in, operationalize that because, the roadmap, we don't own it. So, for example, we work with regulatory on optimizing the label, right? So we need to communicate to say, look, these are the critical things. So then that becomes the regulatory lead would know what do we need to do in the label and what evidence we need to generate to put that in the label, right? Then that bridges to medical affairs and the clinical development team. We need to operationalize this. I remember when I started in 1996 as a pharmacoeconomics manager, and I remember distinctly when I sat when I was hired by a company, and my colleague took me to introduce me to the new team because I'm going to transition over to that product, and the gentleman who's a very good friend of mine even to this day. And then she goes, this is Kasem Akhras. He will be the pharmacoeconomics manager. And I said, okay, here's another guy who's going to ask for 10 more things, So then here's another form in the protocol, and here's another. He's going to ask for $500,000 budget. These days are gone because these days, when there is even a proof of concept, they come to us to say, hey, what do you need? What do you need? Right? But that takes two things. Really, the ability to articulate the value we bring in to the table to the decision makers. And then also to say, when I need things, to say, this is what I needed, and that's the value to the company. Then you have buy-ins, and that actually makes the team gel together, not look at this, okay, so look, this is going to complicate things. You see what I mean?
Exactly. No, fully agree. I mean, I can also still remember, I think, especially the very early days, I think we as market access managers have always been seen more as kind of party crashers, right? We brought the kind of issues into the room, right? I mean, the whole thing changed, right? Because obviously we just, let's say, brought maybe the pink elephant into the room to discuss about it, right? And then finding solutions, all the kind of stuff, right? But especially at the beginning, it was still that kind of, let's say, perception, at least by some people, right? Not by everybody, but it was still, let's say, feeling it. But I agree. I think those days, at least within the big companies, I think at least over. I think with some of the small ones, it always depends a bit on, let's say, which functions and which responsibilities and also experience is driving the next steps by them. But I think overall, I would also agree that's pretty much over.
Yeah, and what's important now, to be honest with you, because we know that the pharma operating model has shifted also. Previously, we had, by and large, the majority of innovation came from organic growth. But we know that's changing because right now, it's a virtual R&D, right? And most of the, I shouldn't say most, but a majority of the new innovative therapies come in by way of BD&L or mergers and acquisitions. The new dynamic, and I'm fortunate that I have spent the last 4 years of my life as being also working very closely with BD&L and mergers and acquisition. What this created is, okay, so if I'm a big pharma company and I'm going to make an acquisition of an asset that's late in the development, you need to bring in the market access because the startup companies, I don't want to say that they left the pricing and market access as an afterthought, but their main goal was, how do I design the program that allows me to secure Series A, Series B, and Series C, and then get to the regulatory filing and be successful and get an approved product. So that was the main focus of the development team, but they may not have a market access or value and access as a core member of the development team. So when it comes to when the stage gets to the we're going to go and enter the market, whether it is a BD&L or I'm going to go partner with a big pharma, then that market has to do a lot of extra work to catch up. To be able to do it. You see what I mean? So that's an important point, particularly for startup companies who are working in the innovative space, to really ensure that you get the advice early on from the value and access team to ensure that you don't miss the 8 ball in terms of what you need to bring into the market to secure what I call timely pricing and market pricing and reimbursement in major markets.
No, fully agree. And I think at the end of the day, I think you just bring its value. And also for a startup, I mean, if you increase also this value, so the product or the compound's value, it might also increase the value of the company if it's a, let's say, a merger or an acquisition or whatever. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's quite clear to me, but I agree.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. We're moving a bit towards the end where I normally, let's say, especially look a bit into the future. I think AI is now obviously, let's say, getting into, let's say, the area you mentioned already, let's say, in some of the aspect, but I think digital health as well. So if you look just, let's say, generally on market access in the future, how do you see the market access role or the function itself being evolved, let's say being really evolving, and what skills will market access professional probably need to stay or let's say to have in order to stay ahead? What is your opinion on that one?
So look, I think that the AI and digital will have two key impacts, not only, but two key impacts. One, driving portfolio strategy, okay, from with the company. And number two, how to enhance patient access. On drive portfolio strategy, as we just had a discussion on whether you're operating or you're working with an organic product or a organically developed product or BDNL or mergers and acquisition, having the market access be a core member of the development team and the commercialization is a must. That, I used, and I think I spoke at a conference about a couple of years ago, and I used the term, it's time to have a chief access officer, because that's very critical. Whether you call it whatever you want to call it, but the idea is that have someone who's seasoned enough and is able to make decisions on the spot, if you will, be part of a core team that is going to be driving the development plan. Again, be it an early phase or a late phase of product. Okay.
Agree.
Same thing on the portfolio is AI and digital health should focus on, or bridging to the patient access, as I mentioned, is how do you use digital and AI to drive two things. One, in the development phase, identify the patient who can be part of the clinical trial to maximize, to basically minimize the recruitment time, maximize the time to approval, and then identify the patient who would be the ideal patient for the product, because that's going to be bridging to responders. As you know, payers, the biggest thing that gives uncertainty, that gives challenge to payers is responders. Who's going to respond? This is why we've come up with pay for performance or outcomes-based agreement. So how can AI and digital health help us in improving the responders, identifying there is less waste in the system, which is essentially driving efficiency in the healthcare system? Okay, so that's very important. And the other thing is, again, for digital AI to be used at the point of service to really minimize the time to reimbursement. We know that for many products, particularly the expensive ones, there are a lot of non-formulary requests, denials. So can we use digital and AI to really streamline the process to shorten time to reimbursement and improve patient access? To me, this is what focus. And what this means is, from a skill set, the market access lead, they don't have to be expert in AI, but they have to ensure that they can pull the expertise, work with medical affairs, work with, to say, look, how can I leverage? I may have, for example, increased partnership between the access to the analytics piece, the analytics who basically utilizes the data that we have to identify patients, and then also be able to work with the medical affairs team to say, how can we utilize the claims data to really identify which segment we're going to go after first, and how can we then drive the growth after that. So two things: the portfolio strategy and the improve patient access to drive efficiency in the system, and optimize the utilization of therapies in a timely manner.
No, perfect. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think especially with shortening time, the kind of team, let's say, responsibility, and that's very consistent. Let's say what we have well discussed in the last roughly 30 minutes. That was great insights, Kasem. Thanks a lot for your time, for your knowledge sharing, and also for your insights again. Looking forward as well when we meet each other in the next, when is that, in roughly 8 weeks' time in Chicago?
May.
But before that, yes, exactly, in May. Thanks a lot for your time, Kasem.
Looking forward to seeing you. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, and we'll see you soon.
Great discussion with Kasem today on market access, not only in emerging markets, but generally. I think it was around pricing strategy globally, the market access development and planning for it, but also, let's say, how a market access manager should rather, let's say, work and which kind of, let's say, introduction and pieces they would basically need to know as well from a development perspective. Personally, I think what really stuck into my mind were probably a couple of key things. One is obviously, what is the future? The future is not about tools itself, but it's clearly to help and support the market access function to especially do one thing, what clearly shorten time to access or make products more efficiently available to patients. I think that's very important, and I think that's also something what we, for example, currently also discuss with the various artificial intelligence platforms and tools currently already available. Another one which clearly stuck into my mind, and that's obviously as well a very, very important one, is market access is everyone's responsibility. So it's not only about the market access manager or the team or the department of it, but it's really everyone's responsibility. So it starts with the C level and then goes down in all of different functions, whether it's R&D, regulatory, marketing, operational, pricing, or whatever. It's all their own responsibilities. And that is then when it's really a team effort to make the product or the compound clearly available to patients. Finally, I think that's also very important. No one size fits all. I think that's also what we have quickly discussed about the affordability, the pricing kind of question when we also discussed about emerging markets. But that's also obviously true for any kind of developed market like the US or any kind of country in Europe. So overall, I would highly recommend the book, what he wrote. I think we will also put that into the show notes, but I think it's quite clear to understand the role and the function of market access, and then thereafter, obviously, to have the clear idea to bring the product to market. And again, as Kasem said, where there is a will, there is a way. That was an episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast, provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.